passengers. This is the pre-boarding announcement for Flight 89B to Rome. We are now inviting those passengers with small children and any passengers requiring special assistance to begin boarding at this time. Please have your boarding pass and identification ready. Regular boarding will begin in approximately 10 minutes' time. Thank you.
Hey everybody, here we are. It is Monday morning, which means it is time for another episode of Piloting Church with Cameron Trimble. She's right there.
Hello.
And Jackie, that's me. Cameron, you're in an airplane cockpit. What's going on?
Well, I found a new button on Zoom. And so I just thought, well, let's press this and see what happens. And then I had a picture of my cockpit. So I put it up here. So
does this count as pilot hours for you then? Can you log this?
I so wish that was the case. You have no idea, actually. It'd be way cheaper than the pilot hours I normally log.
I bet. Also, you're getting great internet connection all the way from 30,000 feet up.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that's interesting. I should not be confessing this, particularly on Facebook Live, but when you're flying, well, actually, when I'm flying, I should say, below about 6,000 feet, you can totally talk on the phone and do all that. So I have been known to take conference calls in the midst of flying.
Okay, we need to schedule one of these then so we can do piloting church while you are piloting a plane.
Wouldn't that be fun?
For real.
I know. And what's cool is my headset, senses when ATC is going to talk to me or when any pilot's going to talk. And so it cuts out the phone part so I can actually fly, right? So it's way safer than texting and driving.
Yeah, way safer. No one's concerned about their pilots on their planes right now. Yeah,
obviously I'm
calmed
a
everything.
pilot.
Well, this show, yes, it's called Piloting Church. We're not just talking about Confessions of a Pilot, which is what you are. We're talking about the church in our world and what does it mean to lead this, 3,000-pound toddler into the future. This week, every week we're going to look at what's happening in our world, what's happening in the churches around us, what's happening in our lives, and kind of see where they all intersect and kind of get to that 30,000-foot view. Your cell phone will not work up there, and kind of talk about what we can see for a few minutes, and then let you know some other great resources that you can be a part of here with the Center for Progressive Renewal and Convergence. So today we're talking about when leaders clash, because whether it's a president slamming his fist on the table and storming out, whether it's, that seems like the biggest clash right now. Maybe it's a church council president slamming her fist on the table and walking out. Let's talk about that. What do we do? Just leadership and the old conflict thing.
Have petulant children in leadership.
Are we talking the church or the White House right now? I don't know still.
Yeah, no, there's no difference, is there?
Okay, let me just start with this question. Why does conflict in these leadership spaces seem inevitable? Church, politics, families. Just give me some psychoanalytics from your cockpit.
Well, I think most conflict, if we think about just in our life and our experience, most conflict comes because we are failing to communicate clearly. So it's benign conflict, right? Like we're not actually out to be malicious or, we're just, we just get our wires crossed. And so and then it festers, because we're, especially in church, this makes me crazy. I don't think this is so true anymore in politics, but, we claim to want to be nice people. And so we let things pass, or we fail to hold each other accountable. And so that stuff builds up over time. In our politics, I actually think we're seeing a whole new level of, I want to call it incompetence, but there is a maliciousness to it at this point that I think is really deep rooted in some of the deepest psychological fears of racism, of classism, of a lot of the isms that have been festering for generations, and now we're coming home to nest in this administration, and I fear actually in places beyond this, and maybe even beyond this administration's tenure. So the interesting leadership moment is what do we do about this? How do we understand it? What's the framework we want to use to actually begin to engage it? And then, what do we do? So good luck, Jim. I don't know.
Oh, wait, it's just on me now to figure this out? No, I think, I mean, yeah, the conflict in the White House and in the Capitol is very, apparent. It's on every headline. We see it in every Twitter rant that Trump puts out. I mean, even Pelosi, Schumer, they're all just, there's conflict everywhere. And I'm not saying you should just run away from it or, say, oh, I can't engage it. I think really it's inevitable. And I think largely because what you're saying, there's this sense of, I don't want to give up a certain power or control that I have. And at times that's conscious, and at other times it's unconscious. When you talk about, white privilege becoming dismantled and patriarchal systems of injustice beginning to shift. Okay, yes, let's do that. And there is a whole lot of conscious patriarchal white privilege going on in this world, but there's a lot of unconscious as well. And I think people will respond out of both of those. And then at times that's what leads to these inevitable clashes in, whatever space, White House, church, any space at all. So yeah, we have to have a framework or an ability to even engage and communicate when so much is going across unspoken or misspoken along the way.
Yeah, I think that's right. Last week we talked about, and I'm just looking for an excuse to bring in my little plane here. We talked about, the 4 fundamentals of flight, and you've got, mission, which is, vision, which is what gives you lift, that causes you to rise. Mission is thrust; it's what pushes you forward. Sustainability is the gravity that pulls you towards the earth. But it's the last part that I actually think is what we're seeing right now in our politics, and or one of the things, and that's nostalgia. And we might also call it nativism, right? And so when a nativist narrative is able to take root, then social transformation is actually made fairly impossible. Social transformation for the common good, in our case, is it's severely hijacked, actually, because what you end up with is we have a whole population of people who want to say and who are fighting and believe passionately in this administration because they want to go back to the day when white men in particular had agency, had a certain kind of agency in this culture. And, they could count on economic stability. And, there was a world that they understood and they knew their place in. And they didn't actually care, and they still don't, how that world didn't work for so many of the rest of us, right? But that world they want to fight for. And that's true of churches too. We've got people who function with nostalgia, and it's not, it isn't actually malicious on the surface, but when you really start to dig into it, you realize there are these very deep psychological human fears that are operating that I think is the work of spiritual leadership today. So, I was talking to a colleague last night, as a matter of fact, and she was saying, it's so hard right now because it's like every single day there's some crisis. Every single day there's something we have to deal with. There's some drama that's going on. And, you could feel that way about church. Some of the churches that we work with, like, it's a lot of drama, right? But if there's the chance to raise your elevation a bit and understand the nativist narrative that's driving that drama, like, because that's actually what's rewarding what we would call bad behavior in the system, then we've got a chance actually to offer a compelling vision of a future powerful enough that we can let go of this good old day mythology, which they weren't always that. They weren't that great, but we could let go of that in favor of a new day that is more hopeful and more peaceful and more in alignment with a diverse culture and its values. That's the hard thing. I think a lot of us in the justice space and in the activist space, we just are like playing whack-a-mole. When I think actually deep work is actually a deep skill.
The difficulty I find with this, and I want you to just fix this for me and everyone, is that communication piece. Everyone has their opinion often seated in nostalgia, the way things used to be or the way they have experienced things. And then the minute something changes, they only compare it to what it used to be for them, and so they don't want the change. And how do you even have space to communicate them why that change happened or is necessary? Here's a very brief example I think of. We have a Wednesday night service here at Riverside. It's existed for like 26 years. Dr. Forbes started it way back so he could, be his Black Pentecostal preacher self in the basement of the church with the Black gospel choir. It's amazing. It still happens. They even let, tall, lanky white boys preach. We have just this past fall moved to have a screen that's always been in the room be utilized for all of the lyrics, any of the responsive readings. Anytime the congregation is saying something, they get to look up and say it rather than looking down into a bulletin. So it really added a lot of value for the community in the room. One value we didn't expect, but we love. There's a deaf community who worships with us on Wednesday nights, and we have people who are signing every Wednesday night, but they all immediately responded with like, thank you for this, because they can look up and see the words that are being sung and be part of the experience more. But then there's a couple of people who are like, I don't like these screens in this space. People look at screens all the time, and here's just another big screen for us to look at. What do you do? Like, there was no space in that 20 seconds with this person to even explain all the reasons why. And that's just a microcosm of the conflicts we experience. How do you make sure that communication happens when everyone has opinions with such deep-seated emotion? And it seems like there's never space to have the necessary conversation to bring everyone into the same table and mindset. How do you do that? I mean, can you just be like, attention passengers, this is your pilot speaking?
Well, you can. Some of our denominational systems that won't work out well for you, but you can certainly be authoritative if you need to be. What you've just described, I think, is something that we see in a lot of congregations, but I would really describe that as disagreement over conflict. So what that person is doing is, I think, offering, they're feeling an anxiety in themselves, and they're offering it up as a counter opinion, right? And I think one of the great and messy things about forming community together, which is what we're doing in congregational life, is that we have to go slowly enough that we can hear each other, and that we can tell each other our stories, our truths, in a way that we feel heard, and it's not always necessarily influential or honored as the direction that the group may move forward in, but that there's enough space there that our voices can be at least offered into the community as a contribution to that. But there are places where congregations, or any system, it can be an organization, it can be a company, it can be a government, is dealing with what I would call crisis characters. We might even call them, like, if we want to be kind of extreme, but I've worked with some people who I feel like are, I might call them church terrorists. And that is, they've really moved to a place where they're not about sharing an opinion. They have an agenda.
Yeah.
And they want to hijack at all costs. So we're going to build a wall no matter who doesn't get paid, right?
Oh,
we're going to.
Man, is it bad that I know these people? Oh, so true.
Right?
So true.
So that's a different thing. And in aviation, we use acronyms, and gosh, in church, my Lord, we do too. I have this thing about the new acronym. It's like we make the world a darker place. But in aviation, when you're dealing with a crisis situation, it's A, B, C, D, E. And so what you do is you aviate, so you fly the plane, right? So if we're in a crisis where we're dealing with a difficult situation, the first thing we do is we fly the plane. Now, flying the plane in a congregation means we re-articulate our vision, our mission, and our core values. So we get clear about who we are and what we stand for, and we talk about that. We make it transparent. We put it out there so that this narrative that this other person may be trying to lob into the community doesn't get as much traction, right? So we aviate, we fly the plane, and then we look for the best place to land. That's B. So we're flying the plane, and we know we're in a crisis. We've got to get on the ground. So we look for the best place to land. So by that, what I mean is, and in your training, you should expect the best outcome, but prepare for the worst.
Mm.
So I always I go into situations hoping that whatever conflicts have brought us together, we can resolve, but that we may get to a place where that isn't possible. And I'm prepared to lead the congregation through that. And that's hard. That's messy, it's costly. It's all the bad things that none of us really want to put up with. But it's essential when you're a leader of a congregation, when you're in a crisis, that you are landing safely in the middle of this crisis. So you look for the best place to land.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3 is you communicate. So you tell ATC in piloting world what's going on. So you declare an emergency. And then you communicate to your key leaders, to anybody who needs to know in your system what's happening. So you bring it to light, right? So conflict, I think, really does get power in our systems when we keep it sublimated, when we don't reveal it, right? And so when you start to name the behaviors that you're seeing that are destructive, when you start to name the racism that you're seeing, the sexism that you're seeing, the nostalgia, all the things, when you bring those to light, then it allows people to actually begin to work on them and deal with them. And so communication becomes an absolute essential. And then D is declare. So you, I'm sorry, C should have been checklist. So D is declare. So then that is like you say. So checklist is you actually run your church conflict policies. So you've got practices in place. And so you've got
church conflict policies. Churches have these things.
Yeah, you should. If you don't, call us, right? But you should have a checklist in place of how you're going to deal with these, kind of dangerous situations, because they are when you're in this kind of conflict. Then declare all the communication I just talked about. And then the final one is egress, which is when you get that plane on the ground, you get out, right? You open the door. And oddly, in small planes in particular, what's interesting is that oftentimes, particularly if I think we're going to come in for a rough landing, I'll debrief my passengers beforehand. I'll tell them, I may tell you 50 feet above the ground or 10 feet above the ground to open your door. Now that seems super bizarre, right? But the reason is, if I'm afraid that the frame of the plane is going to get compromised, I don't want us trapped in there.
Oh, interesting.
So I want to make sure that the door's open,
Whoa.
right? So when we egress, you may find yourself in a position where you just the system cannot work with the particular crisis character that has shown up in the congregation. Yeah. We may not be able to work with Donald Trump on the wall. Like there may not be an outcome that is possible. And so in congregational settings, you may have to invite people to find their bliss elsewhere, because there just isn't a lack of compatibility there, or an incongruency with mission, vision, and values that is just not tenable. And most congregational leaders are not prepared to make those hard leadership decisions. And then at the
Cameron, I wish there were more parallels between piloting a plane and piloting church. Man, I feel like we're really going to have to do a lot of hard work to make that metaphor land for the church. Oh.
It's so weird. It's bizarre how everything just kind of takes off this way, doesn't it? See, look what we just did. So metaphors, right?
That's how we do it. I think what's most amazing, so the thing that I've never heard any of that before, but what I didn't even expect you to say is the whole open the doors 10 feet before we have this emergency landing. Like, it seems like, why would I do that? That is the worst piece of advice. And it's like, no, I'm thinking about the structural integrity of the entire thing and the safety of actually, you're valuing the people over the infrastructure, over the building. And it's for the sake of the people you say, open the doors. So when we do land, when we do come to the ground, structural integrity doesn't affect your ability to still be a human being, which is the great way of saying you might need to exit this community, this institution, and just period valuing the person over, the history and the nostalgia and the machine that we're a part of. Man, you make me want to learn to fly planes.
I think everyone should. It's the best ever.
That is incredible. No, so to slightly pivot ourselves, hearing you talk about this makes me think of if I'm just a person in the world in a church who is experiencing all of this, I need to know how to acquire these resources. So let's talk about some Center for Progressive Renewal resources that people can utilize for some of these things. One that I think of is we have a conflict on-demand course that is available right now, which will help you in your settings with some of this. It's a great course. I think you helped develop and design a whole lot of it a while back. I just went through it all last week again, looking at the content. That would be an incredible place to start, I think, for any of this work. What else? What are some other resources that are in our universe of CPR that people should lean into for this kind of problem in their world?
Well, there are three that come to mind. So for some congregations, when you really are locked in conflict, having an outside person come in is actually the only way forward. That all of the parties engaged in the congregation are compromised in some way. And so you may need a consultant. Like that's one of the, I mean, I'm not a person who wants to diagnose every problem with bring in a consultant, but when you're dealing with conflict, that does actually make a lot of sense. So,
yes,
we've got wonderful consultants who are trained in this, who are exceptionally competent, and who can come in and make a meaningful difference. The second, which is a longer term thing, is so let's just normalize that you will work in congregations or in organizations or in companies where conflict is, it's an essential tool in your toolbox to know how to deal with this. So working in a coaching relationship or with a mentor or a trainer who can help you understand how to navigate through this. If you could do that before you're in the situation, all the better for you. Right? So be preventative and just know this is going to come up. You will need to deal with it. So go ahead and get the training that you need. So again, we've got, coaches, et cetera, that can work with that. The other thing that you could do is I find conversations with colleagues who have gone through similar kinds of experiences is just so valuable. So if there are ways that we can connect you to other congregations who we know have easy for me to say, have successfully navigated through difficult situations or difficult people, and in that process became more whole and more healthy and more open, instead of what we often see, which is bitter and divided and sort of dying on the vine. We want to connect you to those congregations that really did navigate this well, because when you overhear this, you then can begin to find your own way in your own story.
Oh, I can't imagine like knowing you're going to fly a plane into a difficult condition. There's nothing inviting about that, but it's inevitable. And if hearing the stories from some other pilot who's navigated the same turbulence and have landed successfully, it's like, oh, okay, it is possible, let alone to have that co-pilot right next to you in the cockpit to say, okay, get ready for this, ease up. I'm going to pretend I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. But maybe instead of coaches and consultants, we should just start calling them co-pilots, though, if we want to really lean into this metaphor.
Well, that's true. That might be a little over the top. But, funny. So now we do what I call an almost daily devotion, because, I can only do so much here. So it's in our almost daily devotion, it's called Piloting Faith, which you can subscribe to on our website. We would love it. Today I talk about turbulence and the sort of the challenge of when you find yourself in these turbulent situations. The interesting thing is actually that you loosen your hands on the yoke instead of doing a death grip, and doing that. But the only way you know any of this is, of course, you're trained for it. And the other benefit we have, which you've just brilliantly named, is we have other pilots in the air who report turbulent activity before the rest of us get there. Right. So we're constantly sharing information with each other, because there is a real sense in the piloting community that we're all in this together. There's anytime we hear of a pilot who's run into a difficult situation, we all immediately think there, but by the grace of God goes I. And we immediately feel a sense of camaraderie because, we don't want that to happen to us, and we sure don't want it to happen to anyone else. Right.
Yeah.
So we're diligent about caring for the quality of our community that way. I would love to see that, and often I do, but I would love to see more of that in the church.
Yeah. Now, so people, links are below for all that stuff. You can find more about coaching, consulting, online courses and things. And we want you to engage all of them to be, get yourself trained, renew your pilot's license. Maybe really, but really I just mean keep leaning into the necessary professional support you need for the work you're called to do as a pastor, as a faith leader, as a lay leader, as just that congregant who shows up to every church council meeting because you just care so much about this. These are some great resources that you can all access. And this show is going to happen every week. So next week we'll be back with more. But before we go, two things to remind you of. There's a free webinar series, which has a new video content every single week. That is in the description for this video. You can click it. It's $0. You get to join it every week. There's a new video. Last week, it was Preaching Social Justice with Jackie Lewis. That video is still there. This week, it is a video with Brian McLaren from our Convergence Leadership Project series. I figured as we're talking about leadership, let's bring in the pilot video for our leadership course that we offer, which is a great course. You should just check the course out too. It's a fantastic cohort, but we'll talk about that another time. But I need to land this plane by reading.
Thing too.
Oh, sorry.
So one of the things I would love and benefit from is, we only have time to skim the surface on a lot of these topics. If you all would write questions in the chat or on our wall under this video, then that would give us the privilege of circling back and maybe revisiting some of these topics with greater specificity. So, ideally in time, we will be able to actually do some live questions and engage each other. But for now, it would be a great gift to us if, as you're listening to this, if you would write your questions out. We'd like to learn with you.
Put them down right there below. Type, enter, type another one, enter, and you will hear us talking about that in upcoming weeks. So each week we're going to learn about planes, which you so lovingly snuck into the conversation about the ABCDE. That was brilliant. So I'm going to just, I'm going to read you some words that you wrote to land this plane. Put your seatbelts on, Terry tables up, buckle up. This is also from the preface. Page 2. I'm just making my way through and I'm reading my favorite quotes. Right now, we need a real conversation about what effective leaders can do to create environments and systems that lead to human transformation. Today, our world faces crises on an unprecedented scale. If ever there was a moment for a new cultural vision spoken and modeled by a new generation of leaders, this is that moment. May you be such a leader. Now that'll preach. Amen. Cameron Trimble, thank you so much for hanging out. We will be back again next week with more. So until then, share your questions and we'll see you in the air. Bye, everybody.
See ya.